Sarah Davey.
And I'm James Routledge.
And this is Books Unpacked.
Join us as we chat to people from across the publishing industry to unpack the life cycle of a book.
Pop the kettle on, get comfy, and we'll get started.
Hi, Nikki. It's lovely to see you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, James. Nice to be here.
So, we've already kind of done a quick debrief, so we kind of know roughly what we're going to chat about. But what I'd love to do is maybe start right at the beginning. I know that, through social media and other stories and kind of looking at kind of your website and other things that you've got going on, because there's so much to look at, that, you're, a book-selling rising star of 2021, publicist and other stories, translator and lover of Swedish and Norwegian literature. So there's plenty we want to dip into there. But I was just wondering if you could maybe start us off with a little introduction in your own words, just to tell us who you are and what you do.
So I'm a full-time translator now. I worked for And Other Stories for several years, doing various things, but finally, ultimately I was working as a publicist for a few years for them, and at some point I decided that that translation was what I was really into, and that made most sense to me for me to do as a long-term full-time job. And so I took the plunge in 2022 and have been just about paying my way through translation since then, which is great. It's a real privilege to be able to do that. Before working at And Other Stories, I did a PhD in basically it was looking at the use of slang in Swedish and English literature, and looking at how it works and how a translator might approach it. So I kind of come from this real interest in working with non-standard language, in working with being a kind of advocate for the kind of language that often isn't found in mainstream literature, or is now found a lot more, but for a long time was kind of absent or was sort of marginalized. And so I basically, what I do is I sit in my house all day, translating really cool stuff. Mostly really, really cool stuff. I'm so lucky I get to really do a lot of things that I'm very interested in. It's difficult. It's not a very exciting life on a day-to-day basis. I spend a lot of time going down Wikipedia wormholes.
Sure.
So I'm really interested just generally in translation and how it starts. Could you talk us through sort of how the relationship maybe with the writer, the original author starts, and how that process works, and how involved you are from the beginning, or do you come in later?
It really varies from depending on the writer. So generally, I can give a few examples of things that I've done recently. This summer, I've done a couple of sample translations, which is basically when an agent comes to me. They are agents based in Sweden or Norway, and generally, and they come to me. They want to promote their author's forthcoming book, or a book that their author has written, and sell the rights to publishers in other countries. And as I'm sure you can imagine, there aren't that many international publishers who speak or read Swedish or Norwegian. So in order to make it legible to a wider audience, they commission a sample translation. And this can vary from, 5,000 words to 20,000 words to actually, in some cases, a full book, that might be 100,000 words. I rarely do full book samples. I have done some. It's muddy and quite a difficult thing to do. There's no agreement on whether it's a good thing or not. But there has a lot of agents feel that if there is a full sample of a book, especially a commercial novel, like a crime novel, for instance, there's a higher likelihood that they will sell the rights to that book because obviously the publishers who are considering buying it will be able to read the whole thing. And they can see that it doesn't, there aren't like 10,000 great words and then like 70,000 rubbish ones.
It peters off after that.
Yeah.
It has happened. I've read books for people. I've read books for publishers where the sample, there's a big chunky sample, 100 pages or so, and it's great up until that point, and then suddenly it's like it's like, oh wow, this got really bad. Anyway, so that is like the main source of how books come to me through a foreign rights agent, either in-house at a publisher in one of the Scandinavian countries, or a standalone agent. But I have also had quite a lot of experiences of an author reaching out directly to me because they've read my work, or they know other authors that I've worked with, and asking me to either translate a sample to submit on a kind of an unagented basis to publishers, or sometimes I will get in contact with an author directly because I really love their work. In Sweden and Norway, they have a very strong culture of agents, and there are not that many prominent authors or authors who have a strong chance of appealing to an international audience.
Mm-hmm.
There are not that many of them who don't have an agent.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting. It differs from some other countries. So, like for instance, in Southern Europe or outside of Europe, and the US, I should say, it's quite common for authors not to have agents, and in those cases, the translator can be a real key gatekeeper and a real key kind of advocate for the work. But in my case, it's quite rare. For instance, there was an author who I really loved, and I was really excited about him. Managed to get a little bit of funding from like the Swedish Arts Council to translate a sample that I would then kind of ship to, or like take around to agents. And then he got an agent, and it was kind of out of my hands all of a sudden. So yeah, it's a tricky conversation, tricky situation. But anyway, then I will generally work primarily, if the book sells, I'll work primarily with the publisher on, like, I'll do my translation, I'll submit my translation, they will edit the book, and I will generally send my translation to the author with questions that I might have. Sometimes they like to read the book and give feedback. Sometimes they are not interested. Some people are more interested in the response to their work than others, and some people just simply don't have time. Obviously, like reading and giving feedback on a full book is like quite an endeavor.
Yeah.
But I have had, there are some writers that I have built a really strong relationship with over time. Maybe I've translated a couple of their books or like worked with them in different ways. And I love that. I really love that I then am able to, kind of grow with their work over time, and also like have a kind of maintain a dialogue with them about their work, about what they're trying to do, about particular concerns of theirs that kind of recur in the work, or different directions that they're trying to take, or whatever. That's really rewarding.
It's really interesting, that thing about just thinking from like a writing perspective, that you might not have a look at what the translator's done, because I'm sure that people trust your work, but there is an aspect sometimes when translations not might, but if you haven't got that relationship with
Yeah.
someone, are you getting it right? Are you getting where they're coming? Are you saying what they actually wanted to say?
Yeah.
And I can't believe that someone wouldn't. But I don't know if that's just me being like a control freak about my own writings. Like I would want to know, but then also it's going into another country. It's going into somebody else's hands. It's a really complex process, isn't it? Of not just, it's not translating words. It's the themes
Yeah.
and everything that's underlying, and the cultural things that are different as well. In the book, I've just, it's just a new nerdy. I'm suddenly like, translations my favorite thing to talk about ever. I'm just suddenly fascinated.
One of the things that you mentioned there that I thought was really interesting is obviously that maintaining a relationship. When we've spoken to when we're speaking to writers about their relationship with agents, obviously that's an ongoing process, and then working with the publisher, you hope is a relationship that gets maintained, especially if they're looking to continue publishing with them. Now, in your experience, obviously it sounds like these things change maybe on a book by book basis, but your experience working with particular authors, let's say somebody who you've gone on to then translate another piece of their work. I mean, how is that with you? I mean, can you become friendly with these authors? I mean, is it a little bit more hands-on and back and forth in that case, or is it again very much picked up by you, and then they might not see it again until it's finished? I mean, how does that typically work? And going forward, especially working with the publisher, how hands-on are they after you've submitted? And do you get feedback, or does that go to the author? I mean, how does that work?
So it varies from case to case, but in general, I've found that when I mean, really, there's only one author with whom like I've worked on more than one book that has been published. That's Andre Tichy, who's published by And Other Stories. Um, and I when I translated his first, well, not the first book of his that I translated, Wretchedness, I actually went and visited him and spent an afternoon with him halfway through drafting that novel, the translation of the novel. And we kind of sat and like, you know, had a look at the text and kind of went through certain like specific passages that I felt were like particularly challenging. And he was really helpful because he explained quite a lot of things to me about like choices that he'd made, or like his kind of view of like why he writes, why he makes particular you know why he develops his work in a particular way, or like what happens in his writing process. Um, and that kind of informed the rest of my translation, which was really beneficial. Um, when I came to do the second book of his that I translated, which is a collection of short stories called Purity that came out earlier this year,
Mhm.
I think I did like the full translation, and then I sent it to him with a list of questions and with, kind of notes about what I was thinking, and he gave quite thorough feedback. Now, in both cases, both of those books were then edited by the same person, a really great writer and editor called Anna Glendenning, um, who was really, she really got it, and she really kind of um, her changes were quite minimal. Like, she made suggestions about like like reworking certain passages or like, you know, finding alternative word choices and things, but she really understood what was happening. And I feel like, you know, she was a really great editor for the second book because she had worked on the first book and because she had that kind of deep understanding of how he works. And then like, you know, then I kind of worked into it a bit more and then like submitted a kind of final version. And then it was copy edited and then proofread by like two more different people. This is in both cases. Actually, with the first novel, I don't think I saw the copy edit or the proofreaders' feedback. But with the second one, I worked, you know, I like went through all the comments that the copy editor had sent over and went through all the proofreaders' comments and so on. And that was really interesting because his work is like Andrei's work is quite it's not straightforward, and I don't think I think like I hate when people say things are difficult because like what is difficult, you know, like like he's got like specific concerns that he works into, and some readers, you know, will probably find his books like challenging to read, but actually I feel like if you allow yourself to kind of be pulled along by by the concerns that he or like by the things that he does in his work, then it's like you know, there's a flow to it and there's like something that you can really get into. Like don't I personally don't find his work difficult, although I do find it like quite unusual anyway. But like it was interesting because they like working with all those different editors and proofreaders, like there was a sense that like each one of them was surprised by different things in his work, and that was really it was really enjoyable, you know, to see those different reactions. And then, I mean, yeah, again, there's another writer who's a huge bestseller in Sweden who actually has never been published in English, and I've done a couple of sample translations of her work. She's one of the ones who's just like not interested in reading or doesn't have the time to read. And then I'm just like, well, this is totally my interpretation of like of your voice, and I've got no idea what she thinks of it, and like and I feel like, oh my God, this is, you know, it's kind of quite a daunting thing, especially when she's really well loved, you know, and really one of those, you know, almost kind of household name level. And so yeah, that feels kind of odd to have that responsibility. But also fine, you know. I feel like I get what she's doing, and I don't feel like I trust myself with her work, basically.
Yeah. And that role of the translator, I think as well, I know people have talked about the kind of acknowledgement of translators, because it isn't just translating a sentence, it's translating an idea, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's trying to communicate it in that way. How do you feel about that in terms of, you know, how a translator should be acknowledged in a book that's, you know, a household name in Sweden? Should you be on the front? Should be given more acknowledgement, do you think? Or
for me, it's really about what is best for the book itself.
Okay.
And I'm not, I don't mean that in an altruistic way. Like, it's not like I don't think that I'm worthy of the acknowledgement. It's just like I want the book to do well on its own terms. And I feel that even though acknowledgement of the translator and the role of the translator and the fact that this book is a translation, I think it's something that publishers should not be afraid of. I also think, and I also readers shouldn't be afraid of. I don't think that translation equals difficult in some way. But I think that there is still quite a strong perception among the reading public. Once you go away from people who are like really clued in about translation, there is this perception that it's difficult, that like it's somehow, you know, that the foreignness of it is like represents an extra challenge. And what I'd rather, and they might be put off by the name, you know, having the name of the translation on the cover. And I think there are a lot of translators or lots of people who believe that that's not the case anymore, but I think they're wrong. I think it really is still, it could put people off.
Really?
I think so,
Yeah.
because I think that people like there's like they perceive that there's some sort of barrier, basically. That it's going to be less easy for them to understand, or there's going to be things in it that are kind of disorienting, or unfamiliar. And I don't mean that in a patronizing way. I just think that people are, like I'm just thinking about, I was going to a physiotherapist for a while, and I was talking to him about what I do, and I was also talking to him about my great love for K-dramas, which is basically like beyond. And I recommended a couple of K-dramas to him, and obviously it's a slightly different thing, but he was like, yeah, we watched it, this particular one, and we thought it was really interesting, but we only got to like number 7 or 8, because we just found like watching subtitles, like reading subtitles after working a full day, it just wasn't as relaxing. And obviously, reading subtitles is like a different thing to like reading a translation
Yeah.
in a book, but I think that there's a connection in people's minds, basically. Anyway, so I don't feel like I need to have my name on the cover if it's not a book that that people are gonna pick out specifically because it's a translation, or that is kind of marketed at people who are going to be potentially intimidated by the idea of it being a translation.
It's something I think just because I watch loads of stuff with subtitles and read translated, I hadn't, but it is a really simple thing of you don't want people to be put off reading a book. And if they don't know it's translated,
No,
they just take it on face value and they may be
exactly.
more likely to let themselves be
Yeah.
taken away
Yeah, I
by it.
think so. And then they read, and then they see your name on the back cover or on the title page, and they're like, "Oh, that's interesting. I've
Yeah.
read a translation and I didn't even
Mm.
realize, well, hopefully, well, that's a whole other like can of worms, whether you should know that it's a translation or not, And there are political implications to all of this stuff as well, because, in some ways, like people shouldn't be afraid of what is foreign and unfamiliar.
Yeah.
People should be welcoming to different ways of thinking and to different ways of being and living. They're just
Yeah,
not
it's
always yet.
interesting. I mean, I've kind of spoken to quite a few people recently, especially publishers, about um, the translation industry, and I think about how maybe that can be perceived as quite academic and maybe too
Right.
literary for the English market, especially compared to like the mass market kind of that kind of summer, mass market paperback wave that we get every year. And then you see translation maybe quite literary and maybe a little shut off from part of the population slightly. So I've spoken to a few people about that, but more recently I spoke to Richard Village at Foundry Editions, who's a new publisher. They launched last year. They're working primarily with Mediterranean authors. They've had great success with Brandy Sour, which came out at the start of the summer, which was from Cyprus. And I was asking Richard about how, because he also translates. And I spoke to Stefana and other stories about this as well, because he's also a translator. And I was wondering whether certain publishers' approaches to translation might be different when they are aware of the process. And I guess that's what I wanted to ask you, is that when you're working with publishers who maybe know the original language, whether their editorial input makes a difference with the way that you work, or whether that's totally different to working with a publisher who obviously doesn't work in that language, or is maybe only an anglophone and can only judge the book by its merits based on your input, and how that works between two different publishers.
It's a really interesting question. From my point of view, the languages that I work from, I can literally think of one publisher who can read those languages that
Right, okay.
publishes in English. That's Lolly Editions. Denise Hansen, who founded Lolly Editions, is Danish, and she started off mainly publishing Danish and Scandinavian work, but she publishes stuff from all around the world. I have not worked with her directly, so I haven't had any experience of being edited by her, but I have had experience of editing a work that was translated from Swedish for another press called Eloise, which is another small press publishing women in translation specifically. And I edited a translation done by Saskia Vogel, which was really excellent. It was a great translation, really imaginative, really playful, really well suited to the book. And it was really interesting for me as a translator to edit it because I could see, and actually made me really want to do more editing. I mean, I do editing occasionally, but it's not my main my main thing. But especially to edit work translated from the languages that I work with, because it showed me so much about how different people's translations can be of the same, two translators will never translate the same sentence in the same way. Like almost absolutely never. Even a really simple sentence. Like I've done things, translation slams or whatever, or like
I love the sound of that.
yeah, it's really fun. It's really fun.
That sounds amazing.
It's the most extremely geeky thing in the whole wide world, but it's really fun.
It's great.
But I've also, done things where me and like a couple of other people have translated the same texts, as a kind of workshop or as a sort of training. And you can, do two or three pages of text, and there'll be literally one sentence that everybody has translated in the same way. Like it's really extraordinary. Even apparently very simple things, people just read them so differently, which actually is really interesting about like that idea of interpretation and feeling trusted or feeling like you trust yourself to be able to interpret somebody's vision, just because like the way that you view something is not necessarily the way that they intended it to be viewed, or as yeah. Anyway, so I can't really speak to that clearly, but I can speak to, I've been edited by people who are very accustomed to editing work from the Scandinavian languages, and they know to look out for certain phenomena that are very frequently come up in translations from the Scandinavian languages. So there are certain like linguistic characteristics of those languages that it can be difficult to kind of free yourself from when you're translating. Certain word choices or sentence structures or just ways of expressing things. Like Scandinavians seem to love repeating words. And it's really, I recently got an edit back and I was like, oh wow, I really, really repeated their repetition, didn't I? And that's not a good thing for like an English readership, or at least an English editor. Generally, an English language editor is keen to remove as much repetition as possible because it's seen as bad style in English. Whereas it's not so much that it's seen as good style in the languages that I translate from, but it's not as noticeable somehow, or people just don't really see it as a problem. So that's interesting. Whereas like editors who are not so used to working with Scandinavian languages might not be looking out for those particular kinds of stylistic choices or lack of choice, those kind of, I hesitate to call them errors really, but like, the bleeding of like the Scandinavian languages into the English, and they might be more relaxed about that. They might just see it as a kind of a stylistic choice rather than as a kind of the influence of the original. Yeah, so I guess that's it. And then that thing that I was meant to, the issue of like a bilingual versus a monolingual editor. I think that often it really, to be honest, actually, I was going to say that a bilingual editor is going to be more likely to be more relaxed about kind of non-standard formulations and stuff like that. But I'm actually not, I don't know if that's really true. I think I'm making that up. I think it really, really varies from editor to editor. Each editor has such different, each editor, each imprint, they might have a specific style guide that they really want to stick to, or they just have personal bugbears, and personal
Yeah.
things that they think are really important.
Yeah, when I edit if people overuse the word had, that's my massive bugbear, to the point where I have to make sure my own writing hasn't got it in. But
Yeah.
some people would just not be bothered. But
Yeah.
you get these things that you think that's not right. I have to get rid of that.
It's funny how much of that like bleeds into your work though, especially
Yeah.
if you're working for somebody else and
Yeah.
trying to represent somebody else, how much your personal influences or your personal style or your personal sort of tastes kind of affect that,
Yeah.
especially when it's then going out internationally.
Yeah. I mean, that's really the case. Like, and I definitely feel that, I sometimes translate nonfiction. I primarily translate fiction, and primarily kind of, literary fiction. And I feel like that's where I'm probably most at home and where my kind of skills are most developed. I guess because that's what I've done most of. And it's also the kind of thing that I like to read. So it kind of chimes well with my natural interests. But when I translate nonfiction, I notice that I have to be much more precise about not straying from not straying from like the kind of technical, not straying from from the source text on a technical level, because I don't want to bring inaccuracies into the text. I mean, I've never done anything like hard. Like the nonfiction that I work on is generally sort of narrative nonfiction or pop science. But you can't kind of totally rephrase something in like in a nonfiction book in the way that you might in fiction, because the words, the actual words are somehow more important because like specific words are used in a specific way in like there are conventions basically around using specific words, and if you undo those then the thing kind of loses meaning, like if I'm talking like I did like this kind of pop biology book recently, like if I start using completely different terminology like although we had to, like, that was the one with all the repetitions, and we had to do quite a lot of the editor actually did quite a lot of kind of rephrasing things so that to kind of get rid of a lot of repetition, because a lot of a lot of the reason that I had used the repetition was because I was trying to kind of keep this accuracy.
Yeah.
And then it's like, how do you juggle the accuracy with good style and like fitting the conventions of English? Anyway, all the
But
eternal dilemmas of my trade.
but it is fascinating because when you're translating fiction, someone might use a term and you go, I know what they're trying to say here.
Yeah.
So you put it in the way we would say
Yeah.
it in English,
Yeah.
but you can't do that when it's
No.
like the biology of a particular animal. It's like, well,
Yeah.
it's got to be the same. So
the
yeah.
craft of the process is just like it's so alien to me that I'm fascinated. I kind of, obviously it is such a craft and it's something that you hone over time and but the skill of translating, obviously, and also the skill of being able to do nonfiction and fiction. And I know you've done some children's work as well, haven't you? Is that right?
Yeah.
So they're all so different.
Yeah.
I mean, do you quite enjoy just trying something different, or would you? I mean, obviously it's to break up the day to day as well and kind of keep things interesting for you. But what makes it interesting for you, and what keeps you coming back to translation over editing or over, being a publicist or whatever else?
I mean, I think it's just like curiosity. Like I'm really curious about people's ideas, about the way that they express them. I love playing around with words. I love writing. I really love writing. I am not a writer myself, and I don't want to be, partly because it's really hard. Like, I don't like coming up with ideas, structuring a piece of work. Like those are skills that I just like, I literally, I did a PhD, and it was like getting myself to sit down and actually write the thing was so difficult that I basically wrote the whole thing in 3 months, like
Wow, okay.
not to be advised. Absolutely not. But that, it's just I have this like block basically, but I love the idea that I can write a book without having to do any of that hard work. I basically just sit and play around with somebody else's words and like turn them into something that other people can read. And it's just like this, yeah, it's just such a privilege. It's so fun. And editing, I mean, there is a bit of that in editing, obviously, but your involvement in the text is much more transactional. I don't know if that's the right word exactly, but like you have a task, and obviously as a translator you have a task, but it's like you can be carried up, you can be carried away in the text. I translate and I'm like reading that story, and I'm like emoting with the with the narrator or whatever, I'm there. Whereas when you're editing, and this is one of the reasons why I probably don't edit more, and why it's not an area that I like make a big push towards. I really have to work hard to maintain distance to the text.
Sure.
And like, so I love, like, my favorite bit of the process is doing a first draft. It's like, oh, I just like type away. I'm like reading this cool book. I'm really enjoying myself. And then I have to revise it and actually make it good. And I'm like, oh no, oh God, it's so difficult. Oh, why did I write these stupid things? Or like,
That does sound just very much like the writing process too. It's like,
yeah,
yay, my ideas are great. And then you look at it and go, oh,
oh,
no,
not
they
so good.
weren't.
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. And like, I've literally just finished well, I'm in the middle of the editing process at the moment, and I'm just like every morning I'm like, right, sit down, you've got to do this many pages today. And then I'm like twiddling my thumbs, I'm looking out the window, I'm thinking, oh, what am I gonna have for lunch, etc., etc. And those pages are not getting done. So yeah, I'm a vibes person basically.
Um, so this is a bit of a funny one. I read because I do read quite a lot of translated fiction, and what I tend to like about it is that it generally tends to sort of maintain the energy of the original language. You feel something about the culture and things like that. But I did read something recently, and I felt like it was almost a bit sterile. I thought it was I don't know how to describe it. It was okay. It wasn't what I was expecting, the book, but it just felt almost over translated. Like the story was there, but because the story was set in another country, but I felt like the language didn't quite match the tone of the story, and that's why I didn't enjoy the book.
Yeah.
Like the story should be something I love because it was my bag.
Mhm.
It's translated, it should be my bag. And it was a translator that I've read before, and I was like, I don't know, it could have just been me, but it felt like there was just something too much had been stripped away from it. So that connection to the culture was just gone, and that's the first time that's ever happened.
It's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because I mean, it's like now, especially in the last sort of 5, 6 years or so, like if you go into a bookshop, you're seeing so many more books that are pushing the name of the translator, and look at like Andor the Stories, for instance, you're right there on the front cover. And like purity and wretchedness, and I know, a system so magnificent is blinding. Like these books have done so incredibly well, and they're, getting such acclaim and international booker, and the translator's almost becoming household name as much as the author. Like, and people will gravitate to certain translators again and again. Saskia Vogel's a great example. You mentioned him
Did
earlier.
Saskia do Tova's book?
Yeah.
Ah,
yeah.
yes. So we interviewed Yeah.
Yeah.
Skillison, yeah.
So
Yeah.
they've been on our radar a long time. And I mean, I was just wanting to ask you about, your opinion about not necessarily about how high a profile a translator should have, but maybe about the landscape of translating and about getting work, because getting work as a translator must be very difficult anyway, because there's so much work out there that is still to be translated, but you do keep seeing the same names time and time again. I mean, Richard, when I spoke to him last week, was saying, there's only so many jobs out there. And if these translators are getting three, four big jobs a year, um, there's what, like 250 translated titles each year that we're seeing. And that's minuscule compared to this notion that translation is just erupting. And I was just wondering if you had an opinion on that.
Okay, first of all, Sarah, you're going to have to tell me what that book is afterwards because I'm really
Okay.
curious.
Okay.
It's the dirt.
I will.
But also, just to speak to that, I really understand. Like, I really feel that. Like, there are some books that really click with you, as a translator, and there are other books where you feel like you're doing a job. You feel like you're kind of undertaking a task. And my guess would be either that the translator in that case had the experience of like kind of almost going through the motions, or that they were just edited in a way that really
Maybe, yeah.
that really took away because like talking about editors, like the editors can have a really big impact on and it's one reason why I'm like a little bit hesitant about the translator credits and the name on the cover and so on. It's like, yes, I have written this book in this language, but I didn't come up with the ideas, and I didn't put this book together. And somebody else looked at the work that I'd done and they made changes to it that have made it better in most cases. So like, I mean, I can take credit for it. Like, I don't have any problems. I don't have problems taking credit for it. But like, yeah, it's a little bit. It's like some translations are really, really edited, and they've become quite different books to what they were when they were originally submitted. Okay, but then speaking to your point, James, I think it's really challenging actually for translations at the moment. I think it's interesting because some people say, oh, publishing translations is much more expensive than publishing original English language work. And in some cases that is the case. Like sometimes the translation costs a lot of money. It might be £6,000 for a short book, or it might be £10,000. And like that is a lot of money. And even for books that seem to do quite well, it's very rare for a book in translation to sell 10,000 copies.
Yeah.
And that is the kind of, well, I mean, the sums are different depending on the publisher, depending on the kind of paper they're using, depending on the distribution, depending on where they print their books, etc., what their staff costs are, blah, blah, blah. But like, it's rare for translations to. No, I'm going to rephrase that. It's not rare, but not all translations earn out, basically. Not all translations earn back the money that is invested in them. And that's the same with books originally written in English, and the way the publishing industry works is very strange in that, that there are a small number of books that basically pay for lots of other books to be published. But what you want as a publisher is for all your books to pay for themselves. You don't want to have books that are, because a book paying for itself means that it has found readers, it's like it's got out there and I'm not talking about like it's made loads of money, but like I mean, I think it's great if a book is published and 100 people read it and are touched by it. You know, that's really, really fantastic. In reality, there are some books that are published and like, you know, maybe like 200 people buy it and like 10 people actually read it because, you know, we all know that we buy books and then they sit on our shelf until we're like, oh God, really need to have a clear out. Anyway, so I think translating is publishing translated books can be very expensive because the translation process is expensive, but generally the advance is paid to authors when their books are bought. You know, normally the advances are lower because it's not an original book contract, you know.
Yeah.
That's not always the case. I have heard of books being sold, you know, books being sold into the English language. A Swedish book that I know was sold for £100,000, and I was like, there is no way in hell that book is ever going to make that back. It's just not
I
going to
mean,
happen.
that's for even
But
any book.
any
That's
book, exactly.
a
It
huge
was
amount.
just one of those hype things that, you know,
Yeah.
blew out of proportion. So then there are some people who are doing an amazing job of publishing literature in translation and who are making quite a lot of money by doing it. I mean, not making loads of money, but like they're you know, breaking even or making a small profit from the work that they're publishing in translation. And you know, sometimes that's because like or generally it's because of brilliant marketing, you know. Sometimes it's because of finding the right authors, you know, like marketable authors, or I don't know, just very prominent people. Thinking about people like Edouard Louis or other like people who are prominent in their own countries, and therefore and there, you know, people like Kishani Wijeratne at Fourth Estate, who doesn't publish very many translations, but everyone that she does, she is so good at making sure that they are sold as like amazing novels that you have to read rather than, you know, rather than kind of, I don't know, she's just really great at like getting all her ducks in a row basically, and making sure that they're marketed well, as well as being well edited, etc. And then there are lots and lots of people who are like doing amazing work, and like actually really genuinely important work. I'm thinking of Tilted Axis, and their books are like really good, really interesting, really well marketed. I think they have like a really dedicated audience, and yet still it's really difficult for them to make any money. As you've seen, like they've currently got a crowdfunder going because basically they can't afford to keep running. So like on one hand, you've got this kind of these great success stories. You know, you've got Butter, which is one of Kish's recent books by Asako. Oh God, I can't remember the name, but translated by Polly Barton anyway. Really great Japanese book that Fourth Estate just published, and is like literally selling like hotcakes with butter spread on them. Sorry, that's terrible. Whatever.
That's kind of how they marketed it, though.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. And then you've got, you know, other like I'm just thinking of like another Japanese book. I don't know, something like The End of August, by Yu Miri, who's a Korean Japanese writer. Really amazing novel, and sold well, but like because they don't have the kind of clout, they don't have the money. They're basically, you know, they're not HarperCollins, sorry. Oops. They're not HarperCollins, and they don't have the ways into the market that HarperCollins have. Fourth Estate. Like it's very difficult for them to get it front and center in the way that someone at Fourth Estate can. Anyway, basically I think it's really great that there is like a kind of cohort of people who are really enthusiastic about translation. And like as we saw a couple of years ago, with this Nielsen Booker research about who's reading translations right now. I don't know if you saw that, but it was basically the focus was, or the kind of like headline of it was that the majority of translated literature, the fiction in translation in particular, not counting manga. There are specific reasons why they excluded manga, but not counting manga, the market was growing, and it was mainly made up of people under 35. So you've got this whole kind of cohort of like young people who are really curious who want to read literature in translation, and they are going for certain key books. Like there's a definite, like, there are key titles that sell very well.
Yeah.
There are like a bunch of kind of middle titles, and then there are lots and lots and lots that don't sell very many at all. But like there's quite a hopeful feeling in that if if young people are really into this, and if it's not just a trend, obviously, like, it remains to be seen. We'll see in 10 years like whether it was just a flash in the pan or not. But going back to manga as well, if younger kids, like, kids in their teens or whatever, like, I've got like a young son, and I see friends of his like reading not mangas so much, but like, the kind of like kiddie version, like graphic novels and stuff for like little
Yeah.
kids. And if those things kind of open up an enthusiasm for them that can kind of take them into like opening up their curiosity for kind of different kinds of literature or different kinds of reading. It doesn't have to be like literature with a big L, but like just big, just like wanting to read books from other places that like open your mind in that way. Or not even, it doesn't even have to open your mind, whatever. It's just like reading for fun because it's interesting, because it's enjoyable. Then I feel like that's a really positive thing.
Well, that's exactly what it's about, isn't it? Is
Yeah.
putting books in the hands of people who'll turn into like lifelong readers.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and starting as young as possible
Yeah.
is amazing. And actually, I think if that is feeding down to those younger ages, and if translation is having an impact in that way, then yeah, let's hope it lasts
Fingers crossed.
far longer, you
Yeah.
know.
Absolutely. I mean, I'd like to have a job still in a few years. Like, obviously we haven't mentioned AI, but like it's kind of the like huge, massive elephant.
Best not to think about it.
Let's not think about it.
We could spend a whole other hour just on that, actually.
Yeah, let's not go there. Let's not go there. So anyway, everything's great. It's all bright and cheery. The young people reading books, they're not like just looking at their phones the whole time on it. No, but it's, I do feel a mix of things. Let's put it that way. I feel positivity as well as like a looming sense of dread.
I think that's where we are in everything about publishing feels like that. Writing, creating, selling, marketing, like in every aspect.
Yeah.
I think that's where a lot of people are.
But these things come in waves. I mean, look at the Kindle thing.
Yeah.
There was so much fear for bookshops in the high street, and that wasn't even that long ago. And then things have kind of calmed down and then come back with a vengeance, and so who knows? It might be a flash in the pan, this AI fear. But yeah, as I say, I think that's probably a conversation we need to have at another time.
I mean, I think when it comes down to it, like, people really love to do things with other people that are made by other people, and they like to like go and buy them from another person generally. Like, I mean, obviously lots of people like to buy things online because it's very easy, but like the personal, like interpersonal touches are so important, and like my hope is that enough people value that to keep wanting to employ people.
Yeah, and I think a translation embodies that message, as much as any other part of the industry.
Yeah.
It's really important.
So normally, just to end our chats, we ask people, because we're talking about the life cycle of a book, and everything that goes into it. We're wondering who you might talk to next if you were us. You got any recommendations?
Yeah, like what part of the chain do you think is maybe a natural, like organic next step, or if there's somebody who you personally would love to find more about their job?
So I really love talking to booksellers. Have you spoken to booksellers already?
A bit, yes.
Yeah, a little bit. So there's been authors who are also booksellers. And then, but yeah, that's sort of, I guess it's the start and towards the end of that life cycle.
Yeah.
So we kind of think of booksellers in the same way as we think of readers. But also they have that kind of marketing, sales element to the job as well. So
I think they are such strong gauges of like what works and what doesn't, because they, and obviously it will vary massively. One bookseller will have a very different experience to another bookseller depending on where they are in the country, what kind of shop they're in, where they are even in a given city or place, and who they are as an individual. But they see what works on like a daily basis and the conversations that they have with their customers. Also, salespeople, like sales reps, like I am just so fascinated by how they like represent such a like crazy diversity of books often. Like they have such a challenging job, and like the ones that do it well are so astute and experienced, and like they really know they're not going to go in and like jump on you and try to sell you stuff that you're absolutely not interested in.
I mean, some do.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, thank you so much. That's been such a brilliant chat. And I know you've done so many more things, but the fact that we've not just touched on translation in an hour is brilliant. So thank you so much. It's been brilliant, Nikki.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for listening. We hope you learned something new like we always do.
Follow us on Instagram and subscribe to our Substack to be the first to hear more.
And you can find us in all the places you usually find your podcasts.
Until next time, keep reading.